We know something like this, of course, can raise huge security concerns, but what does this mean for the upcoming presidential election?
We want to bring in UC Davis political science professor James Adams now to talk about that political impact. James, the election is less than 2 months away, with early voting starting soon in some states. How do you think this will affect the polls and the election?
Well, it's far too early to say anything with certainty. I will note that the first assassination attempt on former President Trump did not have a major effect on the public opinion polls at the time. But we simply don't know so much about what happened today. Apparently, an individual has now been apprehended. We don't know if this individual is a Democrat or a Kamala Harris supporter or somebody who is very closely tied into politics, or simply someone who is completely mentally ill and politics had nothing to do with it. I will note that in the presidential debate on Tuesday night, former President Trump tried to make a connection between the earlier assassination attempt against him and some of the rhetoric that the Democrats had been using. And his campaign has already put out a fundraising appeal that invokes today's apparent assassination attempt. Until we know more about this individual and about their political beliefs, I think it's very hard to make a prediction.
Absolutely. So, Professor Adams, I know you study parties, elections, and public opinion, as you mentioned. How do you think this might change the strategy of both campaigns, not only in terms of safety, which we have seen a huge, safety risk to obviously the Trump campaign at this point, but also in terms of how they'll appeal to voters, maybe who are still undecided at this point?
Yes, in terms of the Trump campaign, there again, it's very difficult to make a prediction simply because former President Trump is so unpredictable and his strategy tends to be very different from that of most politicians. I will note that, as I already mentioned, former President Trump already linked the first assassination attempt to Democratic rhetoric. It seems likely that he may make a connection with this attempt too, although that depends on some of the details we learn about the individual. As I mentioned, he's already mentioning it in his fundraising. With respect to the Harris campaign and the Democrats, it's difficult to say. The Harris campaign may well make the point that to the extent that incendiary rhetoric causes this kind of violence, former President Trump has been linked to a great deal of this rhetoric. Indeed, in the debate on Tuesday night, he linked Haitian immigrants to eating people's pets, and he has also just today put out a tweet talking about how he hates Taylor Swift. So President Trump himself uses incendiary rhetoric. If he tries to make a link between the Democrats' rhetoric and this assassination attempt, then the Democrats may well respond in kind by focusing on his own rhetoric. However, I think it's completely appropriate that the first response of Vice President Harris and Tim Walz has been to express relief that Donald Trump is all right.
Yeah, a lot of crucial steps coming up for both campaigns. James, you also study cross-party hostility. What are the consequences of yet another assassination attempt given the political landscape and climate that we're in right now?
Well, I should note, first of all, that assassination attempts are fortunately not typical, and it can be very difficult to draw connections between the individuals who attempt them and the political climate that we are currently in. At the same time, I will note that there's always the danger of some sort of a copycat. And now, since we've had 2 assassination attempts, I would be doubly worried about that. Donald Trump is the most polarizing political figure in a polarized political time. Vice President Harris is both a woman and a racial minority, and for that reason, she may be the target of unusual hostility from opponents of Democrats. So for that reason, I would be very concerned, and I hope, and of course expect, that security will be ramped up even further as we travel through the last 50 days of the campaign.
Absolutely. Of course, we know it's less than 2 months until Election Day, so they will certainly be on the campaign trail. You would hope that that security would be ramped up at this point, especially given what's happened this weekend. Professor James Adams with UC Davis, thank you so much for your time and your insight.
And of course, we'll continue to follow this breaking news. We'll bring you updates as we get them. For the very latest, download the KCRA3 app on your smartphone.